tell you that we have one more panelist, and this is the important thing. Thank you very much for being with us. I am unable to say who you are. Perhaps you can introduce yourself. Yes,
okay.
Thank you.
The one thing I am sure of today is who I am. That's probably the only bit that I'm very confident on. I'm Teresa Hitchcock. I'm from the UK, and I was going to speak tomorrow, but I'm afraid I can't. So I have to go back to work. Something's happened. I'm a practicing lawyer. I'm not an academic. I'm not an economist. I can spell both of them, but that's about it. But I do practice with industry. I have been involved in environmental sustainability for the last 33 years. I was a regulator for 13 of those years, regulating business and individuals in relation to environmental compliance. And for the last 20 years, I have been engaged as an environmental lawyer, working with the private sector and the public sector. And I probably now have just 7 minutes. Okay. My practice, the name of my firm is DLA Piper. We are a global organisation. And I mention that because I think it's important to understand some of the things that are happening out there in practice and some of the initiatives that are taking place which are actually driving us towards a low-carbon economy. We have something called the DLA Way, which is all about the way in which we practice law. It's the way in which we approach our clients. It's the way in which we encourage our clients, many of whom are industrialists, to actually deal with carbon in a sensitive and positive way. Now, maybe I'm lucky in that most of the clients who engage me are actually positive in relation to environmental benefits. I know that there are other industrialists out there who don't particularly pay much attention to environmental performance, to environmental engagement, and I'll touch on that later. But certainly from my perspective, in my practice, I work with a lot of British and European industry who are very, very willing to get involved in the debate, to look towards a low-carbon economy, and actually to influence policy decisions and to promote the way in which business actually operates in an environmentally sustainable way. One of the things that I've been particularly active in is the Prince of Wales May Day Summit, working with Prince Charles and some of his team in relation to bringing businesses together on the 1st of May each year to report on environmental performance and to report on the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. Now, when we started this in 2008, we probably captured only 10% of business. But we actually capture now, would you believe, 72.5% of business. I'm not quite sure where the 0.5% comes from, but don't ask me that. But 72% of businesses now engage in that debate on the 1st of May every year. The second initiative that I've been involved in is the Legal Sector Alliance. And we are promoting throughout the UK and now throughout Australia and the USA a good way of doing sustainable business in the legal sector. Now, we aren't heavy energy users. You know, the most energy that we use is actually talking, because as you know, most lawyers get paid for how many words they say. So that's just the way it is. But we actually can have an impact upon paper use. We can have an impact upon waste. We can influence the behaviour of a group of people. And that's what we're trying to do. We're influencing individuals, but also groups of people. And there are also many local initiatives within the UK that are taking place. We have local government. I think you mentioned something about administrative law being very much at the root of local communities, that type of approach. Well, in Yorkshire and Sheffield, which is where I hail from, that's right in the centre of the UK, we have very local initiatives that are aimed at making sure that good practice is shared, that we put into place many forums to share our own experiences with what we call SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises, because we find that for some of the smaller companies, for some individuals, they simply don't have access to the appropriate resources to be able to make a difference. I'm only going to take a few minutes to go through the next few slides. I don't have any good pictures. I'm a lawyer. Law's very boring, so it's just words. So we'll just have to put up with that. But the one thing I would say is that the way that I'm going to approach this is on one very important principle. I have always said that not everyone can do everything, but we can all do something. And that's really I suppose, my mantra and has been for a long time. Those are the 4 things that I'm going to touch on for just a couple of minutes each. I'll talk about greenwashing later. It's not about washing with green soap. It's about something else which is much more important. But I think probably one of the key themes for today relates to how government sets objectives. And I'm going to relate to my experience with government, remembering that I used to work for local government as a regulator, and I've also been involved in central government as well. My experience is that there is a lot of goodwill out there in industry, with individuals, and actually with some government and, servants and civil servants. So how can government actually put that into practice? How can it invoke that sense of willingness, of attitude, of behaviour into policy? I think they have to try and encourage an acknowledgement of the long-term interest of business and individuals. I think they also have to show that those long-term interests will deal with some of the economic pressures that our industry is facing. Now, we've heard from an earlier speaker about cap-and-trade systems. Of course, we had the EU 2010 climate change package, 2008, sorry, climate change package, energy and climate change package. And that introduced more controls in relation to emissions trading. We've also had some local legislation in the UK which has gone towards a cap-and-trade system. How can we see that that legislative driver is actually dealing with long-term interests of everyone and is also dealing with economic pressures? Well, I can tell you that just at the moment, I'm involved in the divestment of a company's interest. The value of the assets is 20 million GB pounds. The value of the carbon in the deal is 62 million GB pounds. It's big business, it's big money. That drives a certain kind of behaviour. But certainly, in terms of cap and trade and the way in which cap and trade affects that monetary value, we can control the way in which that behaviour derives. And the way we do that is to put into place, I think, what one of the previous speakers has said, and that is effective legislative controls. So government objectives in setting policy has to be long-term interest preservation, reducing economic pressure, and sometimes through legislative intervention. But I also think from kick-starting scientific innovation. And I say that because Yorkshire has been given the task of looking at the benefits of carbon capture and storage, a very new technology. We have a great history of mining in the UK, and it's gone into decline. We still have a lot of coal reserves, some clean coal, some dirty coal. Carbon capture and storage is really the only effective way of trying to release those reserves and also to deal with some of the economic pressures on that sector of industry. The UK government has recently said, should we continue to invest in carbon capture and storage projects? Is it really something that we should be doing? I would say, well, actually, if you think about this in the joined-up global way, if you think about this in looking at long-term interests and economic pressures, if you develop this technology and allow the universities to become involved in developing this technology, actually you can start to export it to China and to India and elsewhere. Because guess what? China and India are not going to stop using coal. They are going to have a carbon economy, and why shouldn't they? We've had ours, they're going to have theirs. Let's have a joined-up global approach to this. Let's have innovation which is capable of international recognition and international export. If I can just move on to another point that was made, promotion of ethical standards. In democratic societies, do you think that we can actually support government in the way that I've just expressed? My experience as an environmental regulator has taught me that many, many individuals and groups of businesses will actually engage in the debate if they have someone who will lead by example. And indeed, they will follow appropriate incentives if, again, those incentives look back towards long-term interest and also to economic drivers. I know from my work with the Prince's Trust that for some of the more disadvantaged groups, not just individuals but also businesses, the smaller businesses, they need support. And the innovators in industry, research and development have their part to play. If they are willing to invest and if they are willing to take up the mantle, they will be rewarded in relation to take up of product, take up of good ideas, low carbon economies and good carbon strategies. But I do recognise that there are some problems, and we've mentioned them today. It's difficult having the graveyard slot, as I say, on a day, because you always have to think about what's gone before, and I don't want to overemphasise a lot of the points that have been made already. But certainly, many of the people within Europe have been very, very concerned about exploitation of innovation. And that stemmed originally from the Kyoto Principle and the two project mechanisms of clean development and joint implementation. I was responsible for dealing with over 62 projects between Europe and Russia, which involved joint implementation principles. What that meant was Annex I countries, developed countries, working with developing nations to transfer technology, clean technology, green technology, into projects in Russia, and then in return receive either a financial reward or carbon credits back. Now, that saved an awful lot of carbon dioxide greenhouse gas emission to atmosphere, but it created a lot of heartache and a very unstable platform going forward, because a lot of the technology might have been invested in one project, but that technology was exploited and taken into other projects without the right returns coming back. A very bad experience for all. I have to say that that's changed. I have been out to China recently. I haven't been to India, but certainly in China, I know that the Chinese are already developing their own green technologies. I've seen some of them. I've sat and talked to regulators in Beijing and in Shanghai. And they themselves want to protect their own green technologies because they know all too well that it's so easy to simply exploit. So I would say that this problem of exploitation is now reducing. What that means is that the only bar to innovation is about supply and demand, and I think we've heard enough about supply and demand a moment ago for you to see where I'm going with that, and I don't want to reinvent the wheel. I have one last slide, so I'm okay. Greenwashing. Well, when I said to my colleague, Stephen, who's in the audience, about greenwashing, he said, yes, I have another name for it. I'm not going to tell you what that was, but mine is greenwashing. And that's about making green claims that you can't actually substantiate. And I think this is really important. We have had in the past verification of green claims. It's the same if you're selling a company and you put out a prospectus, an information memorandum with financial information in there, you have to verify that financial information. We are having to verify environmental information now. In the UK particularly, there is an obligation upon directors to make sure that all of the claims that they make in respect of a company's environmental performance are accurate. The importance of verification cannot be understated. And it's even more important because we're getting more legislation. And if you are going to say we are in compliance, we have a low carbon strategy, we are reducing our greenhouse gas emissions by this much, you've got to put into place the verification procedures to show that that's the case and to show that you are complying with the relevant legislative drivers. And having looked at the way in which the states are approaching greenwashing, it can also be used as a tool to promote justice. And I know that tomorrow's session is about environmental justice, and I really do wish I could be here to listen to that, but I can't. So I just wanted to say this as a parting shot. If you have a company that is making spurious claims in relation to the environment, or individuals who are claiming that their products will create a better carbon platform, if they don't match up to that, shouldn't we as a society actually be saying it's wrong? And shouldn't we be saying, you can't make those claims? We wouldn't accept it if it was food labelling. We wouldn't accept it if it was in relation to our finances. So my point is, why should we accept it in relation to the environment? I hope I've provided some thought-provoking ideas, and I will leave the rest of the panel to deal with all of the difficult questions.